watching two fighters scramble in absolute ground warfare.
Goodness!
Only for one to ultimately tap out and give the win to their opponent is electrifying, and easily one of the cornerstones of MMA. So what are the top submissions in MMA history, you ask? Number 10. Jon Jones versus Lyoto Machida. When the fight between Bones and the Dragon began, Jones started crawling towards Machida, marking the second time he crawled at the start of a fight. After he came within distance, he immediately began kicking the Dragon. Machida, however, remained calm and circled around Bones. The Dragon managed to hold his own and landed a few good strikes on Jones, including blocking what would have been a devastating head kick. Things remained tense in the second round, with both fighters remaining at a distance, until Bones landed his killing strike. Near the end, the Dragon throws a cross followed by a takedown attempt that got stuffed.
And he did that when he used his wrestling. Oh! Again they battle in another big...
Bones then wraps his arms around the Dragon's neck as he delivers a knee only to finish with a devastating standing guillotine against the cage. The Dragon went unconscious as he dropped to the ground, giving the win to Bones. As Jones said, "I'm a bad guy trying to be good." Ice cold. Number 9. Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Brandon Davis. Jon Jones is definitely one of the coldest fighters in the UFC. He definitely matches his hype and name, but not all fighters are like that. Brandon Davis, although he's named Killer B, got slayed by Zabit at UFC 228. Going into the fight at UFC 228, Davis had lost his previous fight against Enrique Barzola. The killer had all the motivation in the world to bounce back from that defeat when he fought against Zabit. However, the Russian had different plans. A mere 2 rounds into the fight, Zabit grabbed onto the killer, and after putting his foot behind his opponent, took Davis to the canvas. From there, the two grappled, until Zabit managed to get back in control. Davis was essentially helpless at this point as his opponent began throwing shots at the back of his head. Killer B tried standing up, but fell back. This was the end for the killer. Zabit got Davis in what's known as the banana split, prying one's legs apart at the groin.
This happens again. Oh, look at that. 2 in 1 UFC.
The killer only held out for a few moments before ultimately tapping out. Number 8. Demetrius Johnson versus Ray Borg. Without a doubt, one of the flashiest submissions in MMA history has to be the flying armbar that Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson landed on Ray Borg at UFC 216.
Threw him through the air, and on his way down, you catch the armbar. I mean, that is just sick.
The fight nearly went the distance, with neither Mighty Mouse nor Borg taking control of the fight. Everything changed halfway through the final round, however. Mighty Mouse managed to lift Borg up in a suplex. Then as he slammed Borg onto the ground, he seamlessly and smoothly transitioned into an armbar. Borg flailed around, scrambling to escape before he ultimately tapped at the Mouse's insane suplex to armbar. Number 7. Frank Mir versus Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar had only a single fight prior to his fight against Mir. Although Lesnar was seen as an underdog since he came from the WWE, he surprised everyone in his first performance by knocking Min Soo Kim out in the first round of his first fight. From here, he had his UFC debut against Mir. The fight only lasted a single round, but it was brutal. Lesnar seemed hellbent on using his same tactic of violently punching Mir into nothingness. The wrestler kept taking Mir down and began to throw vicious strikes. For the majority of the very brief fight, Mir was on the defensive against the larger fighter, utilizing the open guard that he's known to be dangerous with. But a mere minute and a half into the fight, everything suddenly changed.
Can he do it? Let's go!
Mir grabbed onto Lesnar's leg and secured a knee bar. A few moments later, Lesnar was forced to tap. Number 6. Nate Diaz versus Kurt Pellegrino. Although Lesnar lost his UFC debut, he would go on to make quite the impact on the UFC and fighting in general. But Nate Diaz is an even more influential figure in the UFC and MMA history, and his performance against Kurt Pellegrino is a prime example of why. Going into the fight, Pellegrino was the more seasoned fighter, where Diaz only had 10 total fights, Pellegrino had 5 more. He had also won more fights than Diaz, but sometimes old-timers have to make way for up-and-comers. A little over 3 minutes into the second round, both Pellegrino and Diaz went to the ground. From here, Diaz locks Kurt up in the triangle, forcing Kurt's arm across his face.
Look at Diaz. Double fingers and a fully locked triangle.
Diaz, knowing that it was tight, the showman even flexed his biceps knowing he's got the W in the bag, forcing Pellegrino to tap seconds later. Number 5. Nick Diaz versus Takanori Gomi. Nate Diaz had an exciting submission against Pellegrino, but his performance is nothing compared to his brother's fight against Takanori Gomi. Going into the fight, Diaz had been on a 3-win streak in the UFC before he decided to fight in Pride. For his very first fight in this new organization, he got pitted against its best lightweight fighter, Takanori Gomi, aka Fireball Kid. Despite his opponent's prestige, Diaz showed no fear. Diaz instead said that if Gomi underestimates him, he's going to get beat quicker. It was almost prophetic. The fight was a war for the first round. Fireball Kid, called that because he had fireballs in both hands, tried to outstrike Diaz. For a while, it worked. Gomi managed to leave several deep cuts on Diaz that nearly ended the fight, but Nick pressed on. After vicious strikes from both fighters, it looked like Gomi had outpunched himself. One commenter said that Gomi's arms were essentially dead weight by that point, since he was tired of punching.
To recover the time between rounds. You know what? His arms look like they're dead weight out there.
Gomi decided to aim for a takedown and took Diaz to the mat. This marked the beginning of the end. With no hesitation, Diaz showcased his flexibility by throwing an omoplata-like setup. But with the shin in front of the neck as he clamped down on the opposite shoulder with his other leg, submitting Gomi in what's known as a Gogoplata. Number 4, Charles do Bronx versus Eric Wisley. Brock Lesnar's UFC debut may have been a complete failure, but Charles Oliveira's debut was an astounding success. Oliveira debuted in the featherweight division on UFC on Fox 2, Evans vs. Davis, where he fought against Eric Wisley. The fight lasted under 2 minutes and showcased how dominant Oliveira could be in his new weight class. From the onset of the fight, he kicked Wisley again and again, until Wisley tried to return the favor. Oliveira, however, had other plans. The Brazilian caught Wisley's kick and took his opponent to the mat. From here, as Wisley was facing away but with his foot caught in Oliveira's open guard, do Bronx was able to secure a painful calf slicer.
But he's got to be careful here because Oliveira's going to take his back. Oh wow, he had his leg locked in a terrible position,
which made Wisley tap only 1 minute and 40 seconds into the first round. Number 3, Damian Maia versus Rick Story. The calf slicer is definitely a brutal name, but a fighter nicknamed the Murderous Strangler is more brutal. Damian Maia has been called this for a very good reason. Look no further than his fight with Rick Story to learn why. Damian Maia and Rick Story faced off at UFC 153, Silva versus Bonner. Although Story was nicknamed the Horror, he looked absolutely terrified as Maia put a vicious chokehold on him. Story threw a huge uppercut at Maia, but Maia managed to take his opponent down. Story kept trying to stand up, only for Maia to break him back down. Maia eventually threw his hooks in and secured the back as he worked a devastating rear naked like neck crank, also known as the rooster choke, for the win. Number 2, Rainier de Ritter versus Vitaly Bigos. Ortega's guillotine hold was textbook perfect, but Rainier de Ritter's performance against Vitaly Bigos was devastating. Ritter, the Dutch Knight, faced off against Bigos at the One Championship 159. The Knight was on a 15-win streak, a streak he won by making his first opponent tap out. History was set to repeat itself. At the 3.5-minute mark, Ritter got Bigos in an inverted triangle.
He's going to sleep. He's out!
The Russian didn't even have the opportunity to tap out before he got choked out by the Dutchman, making this fight Ritter's 16th win in his dominant winning streak. Number 1, Cub Swanson versus Brian Ortega. The fight between Swanson and Ortega only went for 2 rounds before Cub had to submit to his opponent. Halfway into the second round, Ortega and Swanson were clinching against the octagon wall. Ortega took the opportunity to land a textbook standing guillotine hold on Swanson that was set up by a knee to the abdomen. Swanson kept his balance throughout and stayed standing as he fought and squirmed in his opponent's guillotine setup. Ortega, however, latched on and closed his guard as he was held in midair by Cub. He wasn't letting go. Swanson kept trying to get Ortega off, but to no avail.
Adjusted the hands, I don't know, it might be tighter. There's the tap! Brian T. City Ortega!
Eventually, Swanson wildly and desperately tapped, giving Ortega the win via his spectacular guillotine hold, making this our #1 pick. Let us know in the comments section what are your top 10 submissions in MMA.